Hi, Marin. This is Darren from Fire. Hi, Cheryl. Are you hanging in there?
I am, Darren, thanks.
You bet. Great job.
You guys have it hard now.
We'll see. It's been entertaining on campus.
Hey, Darren.
Hey, Steve. How you doing?
Hey, man. Good. We need to chat. Mary's, I think, on campus teaching right now, right? We have KUSI coming on Monday, and they want to do something live in the grinder, and they keep moving the time on us, and I just want to make sure.
Tell you what, Steve, the Fire Academy starts Monday morning at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we would love to have KUSI, and we'll do it with the Fire Academy.
Beautiful. I'll have them out at the grinder by like 6:45 or something. Wes will be there and all that, so.
Yeah. Excuse me.
Okay, well, the grinder will be open? Sweet. Okay, you made
my day.
Grinder
will be open, and there'll be the first part of our academy is we're picking up the people from spring, and there'll be 23 or 4 that are going to start with us, and then the rest of the cohort's going to finish because they had started in spring but had been suspended. So it's going to be an interesting group, but I love it. I laugh because we've had so many issues we're trying to work through, and then that's going to be like 700's our first day to meet everybody, and they'll be right there. So that's how it works.
Perfect. All right, good, man. Thanks. I appreciate you doing that. Thanks.
You bet, buddy. You bet, Steve. Yep. I just got to remember I'm writing notes now. Hi, Pablo.
Yep. Thanks, Darren. Sorry about that, guys.
All right, welcome everyone to the Breakout on Communication and Collaboration Strategies. How do we share the space? We have some excellent folks joining us. Pablo Martin and Marian Edelbrock, and then of course me, Ben Gamboa. And Marian's gonna kick us off with our presentation, and we'll have opportunities afterwards for a dialogue together after we explore some of these strategies together.
Thank you so much. So I'll start with, I've got 3 slides. I know we're on a tight time budget again, so, but my slides are just a smidge busy, so I'm going to try and not read too much and move on. So the title of our presentation is Communication and Collaboration Strategies. How do we share the space? So I wanted to start out with reflecting on what we bring to the table here. And I think as we look at how we share the space, the Circle of Change has been a very good example of us beginning to look at the future and reflect on where we've come from, where we are, and where we can be going. And of course, I have a particular personal interest in mindfulness. So one of the aspects of that is looking at our unconscious biases that we do bring to the table with us, and we all have them. We find them with the triggers that we have in our lives when our buttons get pushed, and it creates a very emotional response for us, which actually is good because it indicates there's an opportunity for learning, growing, and healing. We also have assumptions that we carry with us, which are based on past experiences and may have absolutely nothing to do with the person who we're acting with in the present. So we have to be very careful with these assumptions and surrender them, check them, recognize them, because that allows us to open up to an understanding of who they are, what they need, and it opens us to new possibilities. The limiting beliefs that we have can be about ourselves just as much as anything else. But it's also about other people who we don't know, we haven't experienced them. And these are conditioned over the course of our lives. So, I mean, forgive me, I tend to take a psychological perspective on this. So that's going to be the skew of the way I talk about it. But we do need to question the truth of these assumptions. And we have to be open to surrendering them, because if we aren't willing to do that, we will not be present and we won't be open. And finally, looking at the expectations, this is what we place on the relationships that we have so that they fit into our comfort zone. They fit a mold that we're familiar with. But we also put expectations on ourselves to meet the assumed expectations of others, but we don't check them out all the time. So one slip that we do might be seen as a failure, and therefore why bother? We do judge others, though, based on an expectation that they will act as we would, but not based on their skills and talents that they bring to the table. So if we don't see them, if we don't hear them, and if we don't give space to others, we miss out on what they bring to the table. So we need to look at how to move on in healthy ways. And I'm not going to read through what it says on the right side of the slide, but we will be getting the slides later. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. Thank you. Busy slide again. I apologize. I'm not going to do all of that, because just to simply say we have all experienced different levels of trauma in our lives. And I've heard numerous times about the trauma that a lot of the Miramar campus has gone through. And it's been pervasive, and it's been historically of great longevity. Sometimes trauma is direct, but we can also inherit trauma. It's passed on in the group, the atmosphere, and intergenerationally. And it can be overlaid on other traumas. And that makes us much more sensitive, much more, our triggers are much, what's the shooting term, when you go off much too easily. And we're sensitive to the triggers, and we find it much harder to tease them out. But if we're going to grow as a campus and as a body, we need to acknowledge that there has been organizational trauma. We have to do this so that we can move into healthier ways. We have to do this so we can move into the future and let go of the past. And there are many, many models to do so. I only threw up this one on appreciative inquiry because it's just a model, but there are many, and it's going to be imperative that we work hard on moving on, dealing with the trauma. And the next slide, please. So again, apologies. But what I really want to focus on here is the 3 E's and the 4 R's. And SAMHSA has talks about the experience of trauma this way, saying that healing requires we note the events, the experiences, and the effects that were created and resulted from the trauma. Trauma-informed care, which is what I work with and what our other team members, Judy and Julia, work with, is not too dissimilar from working with the trauma of an organization. And it means that we come to a sense of realization and recognition of what has happened and what may still be occurring. So we've got to be very sensitive to that. It may be subtle, but it may still be occurring. And then develop a whole organizational response. And I was very excited to hear that Wes is very proactive in the way that he's going to be addressing this with our campus. And I'm very excited by the Circle of Change, where I see a lot of people becoming involved and interactive. It's very hopeful, and I see that we really do care about moving our campus on. So we need to work with healing-centered engagement. And for that to happen, we need to develop an awareness of and take actions that address the conditions that initially created the trauma. Some of those have changed already. That's great. We have to explore the culture of our organization, and that means a little bit of nitpicking into some of the details that we may not even be aware of because they may be so subtle. We need to build a health identity, a sense of really belonging to Miramar, pride in Miramar, and create new rituals and stories. And I think that Circle of Healing is a great example of that. We need to build our collaborative strengths, focus on the possibilities, and ensure we support the well-being and community healing of all of the members. So I'm going to pass it on. I think, who's next on this? I've forgotten. Passing on the baton.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. Hi, everybody. So nice to see you virtually and see so many names on the side that I know and recognize. I hope you're all doing well and that you had a nice summer. So I threw together some slides. I'm notorious for information and not infographics. My apologies. I usually try to clean these up and make them look pretty too. But I'll try to spice it up with some jazz hands instead. So first, if we look at what is collaborative communication, we can see a definition here. The idea that it's an evolving process, right? That it doesn't just happen. You build it. And there's been a lot of this talk about rebuilding or building a stronger foundation, right? Looking at the cracks, looking at the past and seeing what we can do to to improve things and change things and address some problems and challenges, and then move forward, right? It calls for active participation, right? So what does that mean? You got to be involved in it. You can't be on the sidelines. And I like what President Wes said about, doing things, being active, not just talking, but actually doing. It also requires us to contribute, right? We've got to get involved. And that we engage in shared problem solving and decision making to achieve a common goal. Right? I think these are all critical components. Underlying all this is the idea that we're all in it together, right? Now, in terms of who gets to be the contributing individuals, we'll get to that a little bit later. President West talked about that a little bit too. Yeah, bring us to the next slide, please, Malia. Thanks. So to get there, we need to build trust, right? To build trusting and collaborative relationships, we need to heal from our past traumas, right? If we're gonna have a safe space to thrive, you gotta have good soil. There are a few different terms I like to use. My wife, who's a counselor, and I need to take a moment and thank her for her help in this. She's a trauma-informed therapist and trainer. Also, Judy Pataxel helped me out as well. So thanks to both of those knowledgeable folks here. But she says it's like putting lipstick on a pig. It doesn't change the fact that it's a pig. It might look pretty. You might have a nice mission statement. And we've had a great mission statement for several years. I don't think it's changed too much. But it's funny, when Westside read it today, I felt so different about it. I felt so empowered. I felt so connected to it. And I felt like it was real. So I think that's the idea. We have to change. We have to acknowledge the past, and we have to find ways to invite everybody to be a part of the conversation. Okay, next slide, please. So this is really the nuts and bolts, and I adapted / straight up stole this from the Traumatic Stress Institute in New Britain, Connecticut. And I've changed it up a little bit, but these 4 bullet points are all theirs. And there's a lot of overlap in folks that are dealing with trauma and analyzing trauma and how to heal from it. And it's a lot of really great work. And so there's a lot of commonalities. You've heard Marion talk about safety and all these things too, right? So people have to feel physically and emotionally safe. Otherwise, they're just not going to show up, right? People that aren't safe, most of us probably know the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't take care of the foundation level, you're never going to get to the top where you can self-actualize, right? And take care of others, right? Like we want to do. We want to help students and make a great campus. So we need to feel safe. Also, we have to have trustworthiness. And how do we create that? These folks argue it's through clear and thoughtfully developed boundaries, right, that govern all aspects of the organization. I know for me, oftentimes I wonder, what are the boundaries? Who's doing what? What's happening here? It's hard to trust when we don't have clear roles and clear expectations, right? So having that is important, right? You need to have collaboration. How do you have collaboration? Well, all the stakeholders are involved, right? So if you're a stakeholder, if you're a student taking a class, you should probably have some say in how that class works, or at least the person putting that class together should have an internal dialogue with you, the student, about what your expectations and needs might be, right? So everybody needs to be involved at some level in decision-making and innovation. Otherwise, we just don't go anywhere. And it's fake collaboration, right? And empowerment. This is a big one, and this is something that really struck me in Wes's presentation earlier. Sharing power, right? Myanmar's not been really super great at that. And I know that I've learned from my colleagues, Laura Gonzalez, I'll shout her out right now. I took over as chair of the Environmental Stewardship Committee, and I basically just emulated her approach to chairing that committee. And I just invited everybody to share ideas and take leadership. And it was really great how so many people got involved and so many people cared, and it really started to grow, and we started coming up with a lot of great projects and ideas. So I think it's all about just letting stakeholders have power. What do you want to do? Great, let's do it. And let's use our body, Miramar College in this case, or in my case, it was the Environmental Stewardship Committee. Let's use the power of that body to represent all of our interests, right? Also, recognizing and celebrating strengths. And that was something that was really nice to hear today. A lot of folks talking about all the great things that the faculty and staff and administrators have been doing to make the transition to online work, right? People need to know that. They need to feel valued, right? Need to be empowered. So have power and then be empowered by recognizing that. I think it's really important too, that to be honest, people make mistakes. I know I've grown a ton when I'm honest with the mistakes I've made. Some of the best advances and changes and developments in my life have come from owning things I've done wrong or things that I could have done better instead of acting like everything was cool or that I meant to do it. And I think as an institution, if we can acknowledge, hey, that we could have done better, doesn't mean we're wrong or bad or anything else. It just means we can grow. Nobody's perfect, right? So I think these are really powerful and simple ideas that we can build on as we go forward. Can I see the next slide, please? All right, and just a couple of tips. I'm not an exceptional communicator. I'm not even a good communicator. I can be a good communicator when I work hard at it. They say that the best communicator is a listener, right? And I think Wes has said something about, we've got 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. Do this twice as much, right? And listening is hard because we often listen, as Marion was touching on, from our own perspective and to fill in our own expectations, our own gaps. And I think Ben talked about this earlier as well. Right? Instead, we need to really listen to other people from their position, right? We want to hear their context. Where are you coming from, right? Because for me, I kind of pass as a white guy, but I'm also a person of color. And so people hear me differently depending on where their context is, right? And it's important, I think, for all of us to really be conscious of what's the speaker's context, where are they coming from? And that oftentimes, and I struggle with this because I got my own self-esteem issues, right? I want to defend my position. I want to defend me rather than hearing others. And I think that's something that we really, to be an effective communicator, we really want to hear, where are they coming from, right? We're often so selfish in our communications. And I think for people that are really strong-willed and opinionated, it's important to note that being compassionate doesn't mean you're in agreement. Like, I want to hear you, I want to understand you, I want to feel where you're coming from. It doesn't mean I think you're right, right? I think that's a good thing. And a big one too, and the last thing I'll say here before I move on to a little activity, is we want to ask questions to understand. I think that's one of the best ways for me to neutralize my defensive positions. Like, well, can you rephrase that? Or what do you mean exactly? Or where does that come from? Instead of opinion statements or judgments, you know, like, why do you think that, right? So our words might be okay, but our tone clearly implies you're an idiot. Right? So checking ourselves, again, communication is hard, constantly trying to be reflective and in the process, right? It's tough, but I think, and we need to be forgiving. We need to be generous with people. Most people aren't out there to be mean. They just probably don't know. And as my colleague, Laura Gonzalez, I quote her again, says, we want to call people in to the conversation, not call them out, you know? So, okay, next slide, please. And I don't know if we have a little time here now, or if we want to wait, I'll leave that to Ben and Malia to chime in here. But I had a couple of thoughts that I'd like you to kind of explore on paper or keyboards, if you like. What do you think? Should we do this now, or should we come back to it later?
I think it makes complete sense after that great presentation to spend some time here.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow you.
Let's spend some time here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so just on your own, you can address one or all of these questions. They're on your screen. I'll read them too if you want to just get started. I recommend writing by paper. It seems to work better for brainstorming and quick writing, less interruption. Things tend to flow better by hand. So some things for you to explore. Number one, what can we do and what do we need from others if we are to heal from and reconcile past injustices at Miramar, right? So what are some things that we can actually do to help with that? And what do we need as well? Right? Acknowledging that we're on both sides sometimes. Number two, what are some things folks are already doing at Miramar to begin that process? I think it's important to live in the both and. We have some past trauma, but we're also trying to work through it. What are we doing? Let's celebrate those strengths. And then third, I think it's important too to look at and consider, what do we actually want to see out of Miramar's leadership? And what do we want to see out of each other as we function in our meetings, as we function in our day-to-day, as we go forward? Some examples I give are, how should the decision-making process look? How should leaders operate? How should we treat our colleagues, et cetera? So if you just take a moment here, I usually recommend 2 to 3 minutes for a quick write. So scribble some thoughts on any one or three of these, and then we can come back to these later when we have our Q&A after Ben. maybe take 30 seconds to a minute to wrap up.
All right, thank you everyone for that quick write. I'm glad that we spent a few minutes here because it's actually a wonderful segue into my portion. So if we could go to the next slide. As I was putting together my portion of the presentation, I just started throwing in tons of leadership theory around collaboration, and it was boring. And it was horrible because it felt like I was just going to be lecturing at everyone. And that's not what I wanted, because that's, first off, is just not me. So when I thought, okay, how am I going to restructure this? I went to, well, what is me? And I put this quote on here because this is how Laura Gonzalez described the reason why she recommended me to give this presentation. You're just a really nice guy, is what she said. Which is a completely wonderful and warm compliment. I hope I'm a really nice guy. I know I can be an utter jerk because I'm a human being. But if the first thought is that I'm really nice, then I'm doing okay, I think. So I decided my inspiration for this part of the presentation is to talk about my leadership style and to make explicit what I actively do in order to share space and to create collaboration. So can we go to the next slide? The first part is how to build bridges and how I approach this. I view building bridges as trying to understand others. As Pablo and Marian have set the stage, I spend most of my time not thinking about me and not thinking about my ideas, but thinking about others and thinking about their ideas, thinking about what drives them, what their motivations are, and really what their purposes are. And by doing that, and by placing them and their ideas and their motivations first, it allows us to start having some open and honest conversations. So there are two components that from my studies and from my experience that go into trying to understand others and build those bridges. The first one is fundamental attribution error, and the second one is the endowment effect and status quo error. And so if I could go to the next slide, we'll dig a little bit deeper into each of those. So Marian kind of set up the fundamental attribution error and how that comes into play, right? So when we are thinking about the motivations in others in conversation and in dialogue, we tend to look at their actions and what they're saying and attribute their actions and their statements to character or personality, basically emotion. We tend to sometimes think the worst of what somebody else is stating. And what's interesting about the fundamental attribution error is that when we attribute our action, or what we attribute our actions to, are external situations. So we tend to not view them from our character or our personality as our response. So it's the complete opposite. And so I try to keep this in mind when I'm trying to understand others, understanding that, sure, there may be emotion, there may be personality in attributing to what they're saying, but I'm trying to understand their situation. And I'm trying to understand their situation within what Miramar has been, what our culture has been, and trying to understand why they're saying what they're saying and why they're acting, what their actions really are attributed to. The other one comes from John Tagg, who is a professor emeritus of English at Palomar College. And he wrote this in 2012 about the endowment effect and the status quo error. And that is, we tend to value the way things are today as the best. It's what we know. and that any changes, which when you're collaborating, when you're going through participative or participatory governance, it's really to change what the status quo is. Changing the status quo is going to be scarier than just existing in what we currently know. Even healing from the trauma that we've experienced in the past, it's going to feel more comfortable today than it is tomorrow, because we're going to have honest conversations. And as Marian and as Pablo stated, there is great potential to re-traumatize as a part of those conversations. And so we have to be able to recognize the fear and the value that we place in today. Can I go to the next slide? So, oh, one too far. Thank you. So really, when I'm talking about collaboration and participatory governance, it's really recognizing that everyone involved in the conversation is different than me. And their ideas are different, and it's about engaging all of those ideas. There's a little bit of pride of ownership, even for me. I have pride of ownership in my ideas, you know. When somebody says an idea differently or challenges my ideas, that automatically in my frame of mind, just because I'm a human being, right? I'm viewing that as resistance to my idea. And so I actively, when I hear others' input on my ideas, I actively reframe that resistance and that emotional state that I'm in, from the visceral reaction to that mindful reaction. And so if we go to that next page or the next slide, I'll go ahead and go through my 3 ideas that really guide my leadership in building bridges and collaboration. And it's first off recognizing that emotion isn't bad. Rather, I want to accept my emotions and I accept others' emotions without prejudice. Emotions are a normal human state. However, living in just the emotional sphere isn't as productive as, especially in higher education, as moving beyond that. So that requires me to continuously develop my emotional intelligence and my ability to self-regulate my emotions and my emotional responses to others. And I do that actively by reframing resistance as feedback. Dr. Murphy, I know, is in this particular breakout, which is fantastic because I'll use her as an example. Dr. Murphy is a fantastic advocate for the faculty perspective. And because she's an effective advocate for the faculty perspective, there are many times in our conversations where we disagree. And it can sometimes, that my first response is visceral. It's emotional to some of the ideas that she's proposing. And it takes active development of my own self-regulation of my emotions to dig down deep into what Dr. Murphy is saying and to really understand her perspective and understand the faculty's perspective that she's advocating for. And because of that, with that being my leadership style, we have very productive conversations, I feel. Or at least we've had very productive conversations in the last 6 weeks. And so I would hope that from a leadership standpoint, I can at least emulate what I think leadership looks like, especially in these conditions we find ourselves in the history and the culture that we find ourselves in as Miramar, the crises that we face as a nation and as a state. All of you in this breakout are all leaders in this entire conversation. And so I hope that is the leadership style that I would advocate for to build those bridges and to develop collaboration where we can share that space. And with that honesty, putting myself out there in that way, I would like to open it up now for discussion. on our points, and we can certainly start with the questions that Pablo posed to us. And I see that there have been a number of reactions in the chat space that I'd like to go to.
Then if you're looking for someone to kick off the questions from Pablo, I'll take a stab at the first one. And I don't know if just basically being, Pablo, can you restate the question just so everybody heard it, or if you want to?
It is, sorry, that, would you say the first one?
Sorry to put you on the spot too. Yeah, if you want to restate it just so that we're all in the.
Yeah, I see a lot of people responded to that first one, so I think it's a good point to put it in there again. I'll put it in the chat as well. What can we do and what do we need from others if we are to heal from and reconcile past injustices at Miramar?
Okay, thank you. And just the thoughts are, number one is being open-minded. Allow our leadership to navigate through all the issues that we've had in the past, but then recognize the fact that it's going to be constraints. And then I like the stance that our president has affirmed and is affirming the challenges that have in the past and has brought that up, and has experiences working in a difficult scenario where leadership changed when he was at a college, had a similar experience. And then keep in mind that there's going to be some difficulty ahead, and let's just all be supportive of him. And I think we're going to have a good time, and his staff. I think we're going to have an opportunity to move forward in a different and positive way. Many of us have worked at Miramar for a long time and really worked under one president. So this is a welcome change for all of us, and anything we can do to support him and give everyone time on that staff. So I appreciate it, and great question and great way to get that dialogue started.
Go ahead, Marie. But you're muted.
Talk louder, Marie, you're muted.
I thought I clicked it and I didn't. I came in a little late, so I only heard Pablo. That's why I said, nice job, Pablo. So I'm sorry that I didn't hear other people. And I think you were great by all accounts. I think the questions are fantastic. And my suggestion for the first one, I wrote them down because, you know, it's 26 neural pathways when you write with a pen and paper versus 2 when you type. So being intentional, we've talked about it privately. We've talked about it in constituency groups about addressing the culture, the climate, the morale, the transparency, the trust issues. Trust issues have been talked about for 14 years. Honest to goodness. And we haven't really acted on those. So I think one of the first things, if we're asking the question, you know, what can we do? It's to address it in an intentional, deliberate, direct way by calling it, you know, not just like integrating it into some other discussion, but actually calling that what it is. And you know, establishing the baseline for wanting to be collaborative and collegial. We always want that. And helping each other be able to achieve that in a, you know, in a space that, you know, we can get our points across and be heard, because there's a lot of information to share and there's a lot of history. And I think one of the big problems we've had is we've been fractured and information doesn't travel very well. And so there's a lot of experiences that we haven't shared. I think that's one of the keys to understanding people better, is for them to share their histories and their experiences, but we haven't been really in a place to do that. So I think one of the things is to really create it with a direct, intentional purpose of addressing it for climate, morale. I mean, sharing the space with equity and inclusion is great, but we need to call it out for what is explicitly an issue particularly at Miramar College. And it is particularly relevant to our long-standing history. And I'm only one in a succession of academic senate presidents who encountered that very challenging role. So we want to make it easier and better. It's not easier. It's to make the fight really, no, I don't say fight. It's to make your endeavors really pay off for everyone, because that's what we really want. So thanks for listening.
how do you help those understand who were not part of the history, who really don't know what you're talking about, perhaps? We have new faculty members who have walked into an inherited experience of trauma and are perhaps confused, perhaps dismayed, or many other emotions.
That's a fantastic question, Marion, because it's interesting. Walking into leadership, there was a lot I didn't know, and all I got was so-and-so's terrible and you should just hate them. And, and you're like, oh, okay. It was guilt by association and all these people were, so I think one of the things is to somehow be able to have a forum, have some sort of way to agree and tell the kind of history, because there is a history, and we all have our perspectives, but there is a truth. The truth is what actually happened, and we have different perspectives, right? But the closer our perspective can be to the truth, the more accurate it is. And I have my own perspective, but I think there's a lot of commonalities that when you start to see this like mosaic and you put it together, you're going to see that from our last 14 years, there's a very common theme. And one of the things that hurts me personally and professionally was the inability of people to freely express themselves, particularly when they're being treated poorly. Because we would never tolerate that in our classrooms, and yet it was being, if you didn't have tenure and you're a faculty member, it meant you were susceptible to be compromised. I'm going to be truthful about that. And people will go, where's your evidence? And that was one of the issues too, Marion, of the past would be like, where's your evidence? Well, Laura and I put together a lot of evidence, and that's what brought about the changes. So yay for evidence, because we'd all still be talking about the same thing, and it would be whispered down the lane and innuendos and your personality conflicts. So there's a lot of noise. And what we want to do is filter the noise and get to the signal. And when we started putting things down, the pattern emerged, and it was as clear as day. And so the change was inevitable. It was going to happen. And so now I know we have to kind of relax a little and start to rebuild those relationships that have been damaged. And I think we're all for that. I don't think anyone takes, delight in victory and yeah, we're running the show. It's not that at all. Those are misconceptions that faculty are trying to run the show. It's lawfully our right to have a say in 10+1. And I learned that going through Senate, and I won't talk anymore. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I learned so much going through the process because I didn't know what the faculty duties and responsibilities were. They are in law. And so when they go, oh, and when I was told, we'll hear you, we'll listen to you, and then we'll make up, I'm like, I had to learn, like, no, it's not listening, it's collegial consultation. It's the law. So anyway, that was something that was hard to learn, and I had to spar with people that some people who didn't really want to engage that way. So that was a tough way to learn it. But I think there's a lot that I have to share, and a lot that everyone has to share. And I think we just need to create the space to do that. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Thanks, Marie. I want to encourage folks to enter into the conversation. Feel free to raise your hand as a participant. I'm going to call on convocation number 25, which I'm sure is probably Larry, because he always has creative names.
Yeah, it is. And, for me, convocation for me, and I kind of talked about it a little bit before, has always been very special. Miramar College has a rich history of being a comforting place. I remember my first convocation in 1996 and how many faculty members came and said, welcome to Miramar College. And in those years, there was only maybe 50, 60 full-time contracts. So, I've seen quite a bit. I've lived through quite a bit, and I'm reflecting and I'm hearing what everybody's saying. And part of me says we need to let some of this just go. It's just, the past is the past. And, I know that, but I feel like we need to just, some of it we need to shed ourselves. And I feel like if we can do that in some ways, then we can move forward in a much more positive way. I think that, you know, we should reach out more, and really just try to, hey, how are you? And just have just normal conversations, just being people, but having a common goal. And I think that that's going to be really important. And then I think what Laura had written in the chat, follow our processes. You know, we have a new process coming on, shared governance. Our whole process is going to change. And I think in order to build trust and move the college forward in a positive way, following those processes is going to be very important. And that's it.
Thanks. Wheeler.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, sorry I got in late. Unfortunately, the program I had didn't include any other links, so it took me a while to figure that out. I have to say that having been around here for a long time, we've been in this exact same spot in the past. And I'm going to say circa about 1997, 96, somewhere in there. We had a substantial change in leadership at the college. And I think one of the difficulties that many of us faced was that at that point we had degenerated to the place where many of our leaders had to choose sides just to stay employed. They'd had to behave in ways that they didn't necessarily agree with, but it was that or be fired. And that we had a very tenuous and disruptive relationship with our district. And to some degree, that latter part hasn't changed entirely. I think our district is in some ways probably a little bit more organized, but we still have a phenomenal amount of discombobulation coming from the district for reasons that are sometimes unavoidable. Certainly the pandemic hasn't helped anything. Trying to integrate elements like people lost and data hell into our operational mechanism hasn't helped any. And so as a fairly new faculty at that time, it was very difficult to know who to trust and who was sort of on the dark side or and it's a very myopic vision, but there was a lot of that polarity going on. And while I do agree with what Larry said, that we have to set some of that aside, I think we also have to be very tolerant of the idea that some of our operating constraints were part of our problem and those haven't gone away. The state is making some pretty horrible decisions right now. None of them are pretty. Those decisions translate into horrible decisions at our district level and to some degree at our local level. And so I think the most important thing that we can all do is make the commitment to being open and honest about some of the decisions that we're having to make. Explain why, do so in a way that doesn't absolutely, that isn't divisive. But at the end of the day, sometimes decisions get handed to us from above that are not okay. They're not acceptable, but we don't have a choice. We're just being handed that cut or that choice. And I think as much as we can, we need to be honest about that. I also think one of the things that really broke down in our last few years and back then as well was the fact that we each have various roles that we can play. We faculty can say things that many of our administrators cannot say. They will be fired for. We can also say and do things that our staff can't say because they'll be fired for it. Conversely, our staff can do things to help us, help the rest of us that we can't do. They know things way, way above and beyond how to make stuff work. They're really, really good at it. Similarly, I think our administrators can get things done and create advocacy in ways that each constituent, other constituent groups can't make happen. So I think we need to do a much more sustained job in understanding our roles and trusting each other to be able to accomplish some of the things that we otherwise can't accomplish. That creates, we have to have that rapport and that partnership kind of going on at the local level so that we can work to, and I'll call it for what it is, to manage or manipulate what's happening above in a way that benefits our students. We have to be our advocates as partners, both at the district level and at the state level. Thank you.
Thanks, Wheeler. I see that we have a couple of hands raised, but before I go to those hands, I want to make sure that we're going back to the title of this presentation, which is collaboration and communication strategies. How do we share the space? Sorry, the collaboration communication, we're trying to come out at the same time. We have a total of 43 participants, and we've heard from a few of us, but I want to make sure that we are allowing the space for the floor to be shared. We have some chats going on, but I really want to give an opportunity for multiple perspectives, multiple voices, and also take us back to Pablo's questions as kind of some of those guideposts for the discussion. Dwayne.
Hey, good morning. So I don't, I'm happy to let someone else go first, but it seems like I'm it. So I just have a response to question number 3, which is about, I think was about what we can do to move forward with how the college organization should change, or is that right?
I just put them in the chat. I tried numbering them all, but they went too fast. I spaced them out though. So you can see QS1 and then 2 and 3.
Okay, yeah, governance structure. So my sense from being here, at the college since 2005 is I feel like we have a very micromanagey culture and controlling or over-controlling culture. I think we've had that from our administrators in the past, but I also think that culture has sort of permeated to everybody, like through our governance structure, such that we no longer think about what level decisions should be made at, but rather we argue about what we want the outcome of that decision to be. And we're a large enough organization that it's not possible for us to make every decision at the top, right? We're a medium-sized college. If we were a business or other type of organization, you just can't do that. So instead, what organizations do is they define the mission, roles, and responsibilities for their different branches or departments or whatever, and then they empower them to carry out that mission. And so I feel like to help us move forward, it would be really useful to define what the mission or purpose or job of our shared governance committees are, and then to empower them to make the decisions that fall within the scope of that responsibility. In practice, we do that already in some committees. Like curriculum, we do that just because we make so many decisions that it can't be done at a higher level. They do that at academic standards, probably a few other committees. But I've heard it said that all of our committees are recommending bodies and no one gets to decide anything. I just don't think that's feasible. And I think it's maybe an artifact of this micromanaging culture that we've had in the past that's just permeated throughout the organization. Just my 2 cents and my thoughts about that. So I'd like to see us maybe be really specific about what our shared governance committees are supposed to do, and then empower them to do it. And if they have ideas beyond the scope of their responsibility, those go up the chain of committees. Otherwise, they're free to make their decisions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dwayne. Shai?
Um, I think in regards to the topic of this, what we're talking about, for me, I would say awareness of who's in the room, awareness of what they might need to speak about or convey is important. Because if we're not aware of the needs of everyone in the room, and if we're not it's difficult to collaborate if we don't have that awareness. And for me, I think what is needed is action. That's what I feel. That's what I hear a lot. That was the topic before. It's like we've been talking about this for years, right? Well, what's next? How can we make the change? What are we going to implement? What action is going to be taken, and then take them. For me, that, what is happening is the conversations are taking place, and that's the most important thing, right, is that we are talking about it. We are being honest as much as we feel we can, because of trust issues, it's kind of hard for us to be honest, not feeling like what we say is going to have repercussions, or if even what we say matters. Sometimes it's hard to feel like I may say something, but does it actually matter? And so it's important for that acknowledgement that, we are being heard. And lastly, I want to say, I think what is needed is transparency, respect, and actual understanding. Thank you.
Thanks. Laura?
Yeah, thanks. Really, really good to hear all of these perspectives. And I just wanted to kind of give mine on number 3, which is also what Dwayne spoke about, in that I agree, there needs to be charges given to committees. We actually do have charges for committees. And there are certain things that committees are charged to do, to actually take action on. I think the problem lies in what types of actions they can take versus decisions that have to do with either 10+1 issues or operational issues, where as much as I understand the need to have work done in committee, decisions have a process they have to follow. And, at the end of the day, everything from committee is a recommendation that goes up to the president, and the president makes the ultimate decision in terms of what direction the college will go. And so, what I wrote in the chat really had to do with, and this is really an opportune time, we're rewriting the handbook. And so I think this is the time for everyone to read that and to get a feeling for how we're constructing our decision-making processes on this campus. Because once we do that, if we commit to that as a group, so many of these issues will fall to the wayside. But it's where we don't follow the process where things start to break down. And I think Dwayne gave a great example of the curriculum committee. The curriculum committee is actually designated as a decision-making body by the academic senate. So it's kind of different than a lot of our other governance committees, because it has that special authority that is given to it by the academic senate. A lot of our other committees don't function that way. Or they have to have multiple viewpoints, and they have to go through the managers group or the classified senate, et cetera. So it's a tricky one. I don't know, I think we need to be very clear. I think the clearer we can be about it, the more comprehensive we can be in our descriptions of what these committees do and what they have to make recommendations on versus what they can do, on a day-to-day basis. I think it's that distinction that we need to be very clear on. And then if we can all get there, again, I think a lot of the distrust and the confusion and maybe the feeling that decisions are being made in silos will fall away. It's just my opinion.
Thanks. Channing. You're muted. There you go. Yeah.
So following up on what you just said, Laura, and alluding a little bit back to my text earlier, and that is, yeah, everybody does need to read the college handbook, but how do you get them to read it? And then when those that don't read it because they've already decided that it's not worthy or not valuable, and then they're in committees or they're in the discussions. I mean, this happened on Tuesday where, guided pathways was being discussed with ImageX, and there was an individual there that never opened a guided pathways email, obviously, and was like, hey, what's that? That doesn't look good. And it was just showing that if you don't listen, if you're not paying attention, then that does affect how we operate. But again, how do you get people to listen? How do you get, really truly say, hey, you need to know this, so please listen. Anyway, that's fine.
All right. Looking at the hands raised, I'm going to cycle back through those that have already had a chance to speak. We're looking at 10:55, so just a couple of minutes. Marie.
Thank you so much, Ben. And I'm not trying to monopolize the conversation. One of the things that I found was that no one would say anything. That's the reason why I went into leadership, because no one ever said anything. And it was always, I'm like, is anybody going to say anything? So I'd have to stick up my hand. And that's the trial by fire leadership that I experienced. So I'm not trying to be a hog. And the other thing that I loved Larry's statement, that the thing about, we can't forget the past though. And we can't, because, the famous quote from our former leader was, look, we just need to move on. And that was a fancy way of saying, I'm never going to take accountability, and we're going to move on to some place where we have to forget everything why we're in the position we're in. So I think there's a delicate balance in which we don't have to, belabor the past, but we have to come to reckoning with it. And I think there's lots of ways to do that. And the other thing about recommendations, when the Senate is talking with the college president about 10+1, there's two categories: rely primarily and mutually agree. None of which are saying we get to decide. We come to an agreement. And really that the microcosm of that is all of the committees. When they make recommendations, for the most part, they're accepted. I think, and the more experience that you have in that leadership, and if Channing's saying, how can we get people to read the book, get involved, because you'll see there's a rule book. And just like in class, there's a syllabus. And if you want to get those 10 points, you have to do this, right? So it's the same thing in our processes in college governance. You can't just go, I want it my way. There's a set of rules. And those rules are really fantastic when you get familiar with them and you see that it's incredibly fair. You have to participate and you have to understand the game. Thanks.
Thanks, Marie.
Pablo, actually looking at the time, Marion, Pablo, and me, I think we'll do a personal point of privilege and allow us to close us out.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll start because I was just going to address what Channing said as well as what Marie said. I think, and I've heard this a lot from my colleagues that are chairs, we have so many meetings and so many committees that we're supposed to attend. I mean, it's ridiculous, frankly. And I think we're spread way too thin. This has been addressed in the academic senate, right? We just don't have enough staff. And I think we're reducing our number of committees, and I think that's good. I think if we have fewer committees and meetings, it means we get to do what we do. We're supposed to teach too, right? But this will allow us to really, as faculty, really dive into the committees that we're a part of and really be engaged. And I know that would help me a lot. And I think it would address some of the things Channing and Marie said. I also think, I agree with Marie, not enough of us speak out. Frankly, I'm tired at some of the meetings I go to. I'm like, is no one gonna say this? Because I see a pretty glaring issue. And sometimes I self-censor because I'm tired of being that guy. And I think it's important that we allow people to be outspoken and that we sometimes push ourselves out of our comfort zone and don't just count on the Pablos and the Channings and the Maries to raise their voices. I don't like to do it, frankly. I just have a really strong sense of justice. And I think that I'll wrap up real quick. I just think it's important that we all do our part, step out of our comfort zone. Sometimes my comfort zone is to talk. So sometimes I got to shut up, and I'm going to shut up right now and let you all talk. But that's my piece. And thanks so much for coming today, everybody. I really appreciate your engagement, and hopefully we can continue this conversation.
My 2 cents worth is simply to say, as a relative newcomer on the block, I am most grateful for, first of all, being allowed to share the space and for voices to fill the space. And I really hope and feel very positive about the way we're moving, in that context helps. It helps you not repeat history. It helps you not stumble into holes that others have already just struggled to get out of. And I think if we can share our voices, if we can listen to learn and listen to grow, I feel hopeful. So I am really glad you joined us today and very excited about our prospects. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'll close out by having a call to action and a challenge I would like to propose to everyone here that joined us for this conversation. I want to challenge all of us to accept a piece of leadership. And I know we have a lot of formal leaders here. We have department chairs, we have Senate leaders, constituency group leaders, managers, and we have rank and file staff and faculty, and you are still leaders. So my personal challenge and call to action for everyone here is to just accept a small portion of leadership, whether it's participating in a committee and making your voice a part of developing the new Miramar, whether it's being active in your department in the decisions that are being made in your space, whatever it may be, to accept that role and to place others above you, and to think about the different ways that you can place others above you, because that's really, when I say that we're the Miramar family, I truly mean it. And one of the things that is most important in a family is always placing my loved ones above me. And I will always be placing Miramar colleagues above myself. And I want to call upon all of us to continue to do that, because I think that's what's going to rebuild that connective fiber that some of our more veteran employees have lamented we've lost. And we'll build those connections with one another. So that's my own personal call to action for all of you. I hope all of you accept it. Thank you all for taking the time to share your thoughts, share your experiences. I hope we can dig a little bit deeper into some of those experiences, so that way we can build forward. I see President Lundberg has joined us. President Lundberg, would you like to give any parting words before we head back to our general session?
Actually, no. I think you all have been saying great things, and thank you for recognizing me being here. I was bouncing around the sessions. There's so many good things happening, so many good conversations, and in the chat box there's a thank you for honest discussion. And I guess I'm a little stunned, coming into Miramar, knowing the need for healing and all that. I'm a little bit stunned at how open people are and how willing they are to put themselves out there. And I would encourage us to do that. I guess real quick, what I would say, and then I'll be quiet. I have Pablo's tendency to just talk. So, on the leadership piece, you're all spot on. At least the comments that I heard are spot on. It needs to be shared, and that's my promise to you, is it will be. So, I have my role certainly, and I guarantee you there will be times when I'm given marching orders, and I will carry those out. That's expected. But this has to happen in a way that we're working together collaboratively. And the buck often will stop with me, and there may be legal reasons why we have to go one direction or another, or a compliance thing or something like that. But when that happens, it will be communicated, and you will understand that. So, where there's deviations, that's where that will occur. I just have to carve out that space too, that's a necessity of doing business, so to speak. And the English guy in me hates using the word business, but no offense to the business folks in the room. But keep on keeping on the way you are, and with the thoughts you have. I think we're going to pull together very well. And I'm excited to be here. And thank you for being open. Thank you for sharing, and know that you are heard. And Pablo, I'm using my 2 ears as much as I can. So, all right, thank you all.
Thank you, President Lundberg. And with that, that concludes this breakout session. We're going to come back together at 11:15 in the main room. Have a nice quick break, and I'll see you on the other side.
Wow, it's really moving closings from you both, Ben and Marion. I really appreciated those.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. Thanks much. Appreciate it.
That was a good. For very little time to prepare, I think we came together very well.
Yeah, thank you. I am just very grateful. I'm so grateful to be part of this.
Yeah, super cool.
Thank you.
We're gonna make things better.
Yeah.
Or at least fall asleep exhausted every night trying.
Trying hard.
Yeah. All right, I'll see you.
Break. All right, bye everybody.
Yeah, we'll see you on the other side.
Thanks, Malia.
Yes, thank you, Malia.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Malia. Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah.